Caution. The enemy is approaching. 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 Caution. Caution. The enemy is approaching. The enemy is. The enemy is. The enemy is. Caution. 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 The enemy is.
My job's not done yet.
Caution.
Left Alive is Metal Gear Solid fanfiction gone horribly wrong. I've got so many questions about this game. Why is Square Enix's name attached? Why, when it plays like arse and looks like the shit inside said arse, does it cost the price of a full premium game? This is a $60 game. It looks like it's worth about $20 at best, and even if it was $20, I wouldn't recommend it. The other question I have is, if it is so desperately in love with Metal Gear Solid, why didn't the developers actually play Metal Gear Solid? I refuse to believe that they played Metal Gear Solid, any Metal Gear Solid, with the exception of maybe Metal Gear Survive, and thought to themselves, we can do that, and this game, Left Alive, is that. We've made Metal Gear Solid. I mean, just look at the menus, and they all make little ting, ting, ting noises, because it wants you to think you're playing a Metal Gear Solid game. The UI, the menus, it's all set out just like a Solid Snake adventure, except it's not. It's cheap, ugly, hideous, boring, broken, and not worth anybody's time. The game is desperate to foist upon you the idea of using gadgets to get through encounters. Use gadgets, create distractions, lay traps. The problem is, enemies are either so clustered in tight spaces that using gadgets is akin to basically just popping something down and luring them out one at a time. And that's really dull. This sequence alone took me, well, longer than the footage I have of it, and I've got quite a bit of footage of it, and it's just a case because these are the only gadgets I have on me at the moment, because you're limited by what you can find and make, you know, what ingredients or what have you need to make the traps. I had a couple landmines and some tin cans. I was just throwing them out and letting them come in one by one, but they're either so clustered that your gadgets don't really feel all that efficient at taking them out, and don't even try and fight them. Guns and health seem included almost as a joke, but they're either so clustered or, as we'll see in this case, they're so far spread out, you never need to really use the gadgets. You just go from point A to point B, crouch if you want, and it's really long and slow and boring, and that is mostly what Left Alive is. Long and slow and boring, or if you get caught, like I say, almost for a goof, for a gag, they give you a health bar and the ability to fight back, but it's a waste of time. You will get surrounded by enemies and they will chew through your health like that. No bother whatsoever. It's not just guards you've got to watch out for, it's giant mechs that will chew through you like paper. The game is so bad. It's animated like the characters are made out of twigs and bits of rock. The enemy AI is all over the place. There's no real good way of telling whether you're being looked at or not. There's these little red lines that shimmer on the sides of the screen to tell you where enemies roughly are, but sometimes it just feels arbitrary when you get spotted and when you don't. I've been able to essentially walk right under their fucking noses before and get away with it, and sometimes I'll think I'm really hidden and then suddenly I'll get spotted and it's all over, and at that point you run and hope for the best or you just die. And while you're dealing with all this, you're also having to cope with this AI voiceover that constantly says, "Caution, the enemy is approaching," over and over again, and the enemy is never approaching. You're moving near them and it tells you the enemy is approaching, and because the enemies are dotted around all over the place, especially in some of these open yet incredibly sparse environments, you're hearing, "Caution, the enemy..."
The enemy is approaching.
You're hearing it over and over again. I just got interrupted by it while I was doing the voiceover. Caution, the enemy is fucking approaching. And that's why I say, despite this game clearly trying to be Metal Gear Solid fan fiction, they could only have played Metal Gear Survive, which also has an AI that bothers you all of the time. And that's the bit they thought was worth preserving. Not workable stealth where you know what you're doing and the gadgets are convenient to use and, you know, there's a radar and all of this stuff. No. They didn't let you feel like you were a stealth operative. They let you feel like you were a bundle of rocks in a bag with sticks for legs, just staggering about the place. There's this bit of a mech shooting thing, but this also goes on for way too long and is boring. And that's pretty much what Left Alive is. You get these friggin' gadgets, right? But the controls are totally stodgy. You've got one button, right? I don't know why I said button. You've got one button that's used for healing, laying traps, and throwing stuff. And you use the D-pad to select which it is. And if you think that gets you confused, like sometimes you might want to throw a grenade or a can and you end up healing yourself, if you think that'll happen a lot, it does, unless you keep an eagle eye on that corner of the screen to make sure you've always got the right thing selected. There are lots of buttons on a control. I don't know if you... I'll just speak directly to the developers. I don't know if y'all have ever actually played a video game. I'm genuinely concerned you haven't. But if you ever had, there are these things called controllers that you can use to control them. Or mice and keyboards. They got lots of buttons. But the point is that whether it's a keyboard or a controller, there are lots of buttons on that input, and you can use them to do lots of things. You don't need one button to heal and to throw and to lay traps, and I know that you don't need one button for all that, because I've played other video games, many other video games. You only really need to play about 5 to nail down the principles of a stealth action video game. I mean, you don't even have to make them 5 stealth action video games. I think this game would be better if you'd at least played fucking a Dora the Explorer game, just anything, to understand how interactive entertainment works. It don't work like this. Crouched, stumbling around in a sparse environment, being so very bored and hearing "Caution, the enemy is approaching" over and fucking over again. This, very much like The Quiet Man, makes me wonder what the hell Square Enix is attaching its name to these days. Square seems to want to be more involved in the independent side of video games. To be involved with, but not necessarily make, interesting, quirky, otherwise unheard of games. And they seem to do that with The Quiet Man, something that at least masqueraded as artistic. Something that the enemy is approaching. Sorry, it's driving me up the wall. I'm hearing it all over again.
The enemy is approaching.
I'm hearing it all over again while I'm talking, and it's absolutely fucking mind-numbing. The enemy is fucking approaching. I don't know if you've worked that out yet. But, yeah. So, The Quiet Man masqueraded as this artistic, interesting, unique game. And it was utter shite. And then Left Alive. I mean, I should have figured something out when I looked at it on the store page, and the one trailer it has was this dry, boring cutscene talking about the game world's geopolitical situation, with no gameplay whatsoever on display. Utterly shameful. Left Alive is unbelievable. I don't know what anyone was thinking bringing this out and charging full price for it. Full price! This ain't a budget game. At least The Quiet Man was cheaper than the average title. This is disgusting. Oh, and if you're playing on PS4, right, and you haven't fiddled with your share settings, every time you go into and out of a cutscene, you get that pop-up that says, the gameplay recording's been blocked, and then gameplay recording's been resumed over and over again. I've played many games where that doesn't happen. It happens here and there for maybe like login details or the occasional important cutscene or an intro cutscene, more like. This is every single one, which is weird because the cutscenes themselves have gameplay elements where you're just basic dialogue choices. You've played that before. You've played many of those games. Again, that's something they seem to have picked up from other video games. Nothing that actually makes games fun. Just really bog standard dialogue trees that claim to mean something. But even if they've got an impact later on in the game, it's still a lie to say they do, because no one in their right mind should be playing that long. So there is no long-lasting impact, because no one should be playing this game for a long time. I played about as much as I could stand to come and talk to you about it and get footage, and that was too much. That was too much, and it's a shame because despite all this, there are some ideas in there, which, again, speaks to this idea that they may have had ideas for games, but didn't actually understand how to make them. The actual premise, this idea of being a human sneaking around in the wake of a mech battle, that's interesting. Just how horrifying it must be for mech battles to occur for civilians. But they don't really bother with that. The mechs are just there to be fucking annoying. There are also these moments where you can find civilians who are hiding and direct them to a safe house, and you can use the map to tell them when to move and when not to. And that's interesting, although you normally just set it and forget it, and then they end up dying because you can't be bothered to play the game properly, because they couldn't be bothered to make a game properly. This game isn't made properly. It's rubbish, it's boring, and caution!
Caution. The enemy is approaching.